Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining. This is Immigration 301, and we spend this time breaking down complex issues in the immigration landscape and try to give people what really is going on in the immigration space from experts like Rachel Winkler, who is a partner at Nixon Peabody and has a really interesting perspective being based in DC right now given everything that's going on and the volatility in the immigration landscape. I'm so excited to have you here. And we're going to start in with really just learning more about you and then diving into some questions about what's happening right now. For everyone who does not know me, my name is Danielle Goldman. I'm co-founder and CEO of the Build Fellowship and Open Avenues Foundation, which has a CAP-exempt H-1B visa solution as well as O1 agency programs for folks who are looking for that as well. So we'll dive in right now, Rachel. I would love to actually have you introduce yourself to get started. And if you could tell us why you also got into the immigration world, because people are asking that question often right now as to why anyone would choose to take on the complexity of immigration. That would be a great place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Danielle, thank you so much for having me. And I apologize, we were supposed to talk last week and I had lost my voice. So I'm on the road today. So it's dispatched from DC, but I'm actually in Savannah. So thanks for having me and the flexibility, and I'm happy to be able to actually talk to you.
Yep.
Um, so I am a partner in Nixon Peabody in our cross-border risks group within our government investigations and white collar team. And I got into immigration, kind of, it was something that always interested me. In college, I was really interested in the welfare state and how migration patterns had impacted different policies that developed in support of different welfare states around the world, and how migration patterns really impacted them. I have, I'm Jewish. My family has, kind of, they weren't direct Holocaust survivors, but had they hung around where they lived a little bit longer, we would have been directly impacted by that, and that led to a really strong interest in studying, kind of why the history of immigration in the United States, who was allowed in, who wasn't. And then, ultimately I grew up in Arizona, and I grew up in Phoenix, and I grew up around border issues and in a community directly impacted by border issues, by immigration. I worked, I worked in high school and college with folks who were undocumented, and it was a direct issue that interested me, and really motivated me and made me appreciate, the American dream, and made me appreciate the struggle that people went through to come here and to build lives here and to have the kinds of opportunities that I was afforded by virtue of my birth. And that all led to an interest in immigration. Fortunately, in law school, I had lots of great opportunities to do a work around immigration related issues. My law school had a clinic, and I really enjoyed immigration law. It was constantly evolving. It was a hot topic even then, and it was fun. It was a fun challenge. So it all kind of came together. And then I had an opportunity right out of law school to start working for the Department of Homeland Security, and that opened kind of a whole new universe. You don't really know what you don't know when you
Totally.
are a young lawyer, or young in your profession. And by virtue of the opportunity I had within the department, I was exposed to, kind of how the levers were pulled and pushed at the highest levels of government. And I was afforded this incredible privilege of, supporting the American people, doing policy work and individual kind of case constituent work that directly helped improve people's lives. And I got to kind of see from a very high level how things worked and how the sausage gets made, if you will.
Totally. I mean,
Uh,
it's an incredibly unique perspective, Rachel, having worked at DHS, given everything happening at DHS right now. Do you feel like we're in unprecedented times in your career? And if you could lift the hood for folks a little bit, like what is happening at DHS that's different today than when you were there? Do you have any insight into some of the changes in how things are actually running?
Yeah. Look, I think that when I was there, it was obviously it was a Democratic administration. But we were um, President Obama at the time deported more immigrants than anybody else had, and so I think that wasn't something we were afraid of. I work with a former ICE director. I work with a ton of former retired ICE you know HSI special agents in charge and ERO field office directors. It's a controversial thing to say today maybe, but like I ICE does important work, and there are folks here that shouldn't be here and that we don't want here. And we worked really hard under with my time at DHS to make sure that we were prioritizing enforcement towards folks that shouldn't be here, that weren't making our communities safer, and that we're breaking our laws in meaningful ways. And I think that when you look at the numbers, the deportation numbers from back then, you see that, we were deporting criminals, we were deporting people who had serious immigration violations. At the same time, though, back then, we were really focused on what, on common comprehensive immigration reform, on policies that we're kind of common sense. Like what, DACA, as part of the rollout, the creation and rollout of DACA. And we got really close to a meaningful comprehensive immigration reform bill in 2012 with the support from both sides of the aisle that I think was a fair, it strengthened border security, which we need, that it also fixed longstanding challenges. And I think the biggest challenge with how the department is focusing immigration priorities today is they are so heavily focused on enforcement and focused on more restrictive policies that we're losing sight of some of those common sense goals. And I think we're seeing that kind of the downstream impact of that on businesses, on employers, on how well coordinated local efforts are with headquarters, which, wink, wink, they're not, despite lots of efforts to try to ensure they are. And I think you have a lot of folks feeling an impact that didn't
Yep.
anticipate feeling an impact as well, right? I have a lot of clients that call and say, well, I supported this administration. I support this president, but like I don't think he knows that it's having this
Yeah.
impact on me or on
Right.
my employees. And I didn't think it was going to impact my employees in this way.
Right.
Obviously, I very heavily encouraged them to call their congressman instead of
Yeah.
calling me to complain
Right.
about it. Because that's, ultimately at the end of the day, the administration needs to hear from, they're going to ignore folks that aren't their constituent. Not that they're going to ignore necessarily, but they're less motivated to hear from, and it's less effective, as we see, to if you are not their constituent, to be communicating these issues. But in particular, if it's somebody that if you've supported them, it's ultimately, I think, kind of your responsibility to call them out if it's not working, or at least communicate the impact that it's having on you. And that's what I've encouraged my clients to do kind of across the board is if this isn't what you thought would happen, or if you supported this, but it's having an impact you didn't anticipate, you
Right.
need to communicate that
Or
through.
respond to rulemaking,
Yes.
and actually take those actions. Absolutely. What's your sense on, do you have a sense that the administration's focus on this enforcement and restrictive policymaking is somewhat for show, and they know that there's going to be, there's going to be litigation, there's going to be a change in the way that this is actually enforced, and it's not enforceable perhaps, but they want to, be on social media, talking about these things in a certain way. I mean, what is this sentiment from immigration attorneys and your networks on what's real versus what's a show and for perception, of the American people?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head regarding the strategy here that we're seeing kind of across the board, but also with immigration is, kind of throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks, right?
Yeah,
And sometimes the most effective kind of component of that strategy is just getting a narrative out there into the public sphere, even if it's not necessarily what's going to happen at the end of the day. And that just having that narrative out there shifts the conversation, right? And it not only kind of rolls back our expectations, right? We kind of self-select us in a certain way. It also it achieves goals because it keeps folks happy if they're hearing, oh wait, so you are arresting dangerous criminals, which they are. ICE has always gone after dangerous criminals, and I'm happy they continue to do it. I'm happy when they find people that and deport people that don't make our communities safe. The reality is, though, are their efforts solely being focused on that, or are they also catching people who fell out of, didn't even fall out of status, but were they NTA'd because USCIS didn't catch a change of status petition,
right.
or they switched employers, and an NTA was issued because
Yep.
that's the new policy, right?
Can you
Like, I think,
explain for some folks on the call what an NTA is?
yeah, so an NTA is a notice to appear, which is the paperwork filed in immigration court to start a removal process. And we're hearing, this is, anecdotal, but there have been cases where folks on H-1B or O-1 who switch employers. Traditionally, an employer advises USCIS, the immigration agency, when that happens. USCIS now has very, kind of, they've leaned forward on their policy in terms of issuing notices to appear. And if they find out that your status has expired and they don't, sometimes even if they don't have an immediate record in front of them that your employment has switched, they're going to issue a notice to appear, and you're going to get dragged to immigration court, or you're going to have to pay an attorney to get an immigration judge to dismiss your case with proof that you've lawfully switched employers, you've done everything properly. Ultimately, it's just a giant waste of resources, right? And I don't think it's common sense.
Yeah,
But it is not that piece, right? There are definitely things they're doing that are
yeah,
lawful. There's tons of stuff that I think they're doing that isn't necessarily, that I would argue isn't lawful, and there's lots of people litigating those issues. And and some of it is incredibly successful, and you've got federal judges lining up behind it saying you can't do this, and you've got issues that are going to the Supreme Court. And I think ultimately, the administration expects not to win on all of these fronts.
right.
They know they're not going to win, but they are managing the conversation.
Yeah. Absolutely. They really are. I mean, there's a lot of fear. And I think that's from employers and from foreign nationals, and navigating what is real and what as companies prepare, specifically, I mean, let's take H-1Bs as a place to start. Companies file H-1B registrants into the lottery in March, and there's so much confusion right now about what they should be thinking about their hiring practices as we head into, even companies are thinking about budgets for next year and how they should budget as they hire. How are you advising your clients right now as they think about this recent proclamation, as they think about the wage-based lottery system? Could you break down a little bit of the changes that you actually expect to be implemented versus changes you think are potentially for perception, for show, and might get shut down pretty quickly by litigation.
Yeah. Yeah. So, ultimately, almost categorically, my clients are kind of scaling back their hiring plans.
Mhm.
The folks that I represent generally use H-1Bs very selectively anyway. And so obviously like a $100,000 fee is insane for any of them
Right.
to pay,
Right.
but it's not off the table
Right.
for some of my clients, right?
Yep.
Particularly to get the experienced
Right.
professionals that they need. And while we're going to closely monitor the litigation, and I do expect there to be successful challenges related to that, to that proclamation. I think I don't know how timely they're going to be, right? And I think it's a call for employers. Do you want to pursue a national interest waiver?
Yep.
We don't know how that's going to play out yet. We don't know how that's going to be applied. There's ongoing conversations inside the administration regarding how they think that's going to be applied. And you've got like warring camps internally regarding, who should qualify, what kinds of business should qualify, what's in the national interest. And, we're more restrictionist folks who are like, blah, zero, like nothing,
Right.
nada. Like they should be a, Department of Work contractor before we will ever consider it in the national interest. Right. And so I think they have a roadmap internally of what they want, but there are still people kind of clawing away at it and clawing away at each other inside the
Yeah.
administration. So we're still going to see how that shakes out. I am, obviously you have to be resource sensitive, and I have to be resource sensitive for my clients. But I am also I'm very much of the strategy. Like you're like, it's not a no until it's a hard no,
Yeah.
there's
Right.
no down, obviously evaluate, but for the most part, there's generally no downside in trying.
Yep.
And particularly because of my experience in the government, I try really hard not to like overrule myself, right? Like not to say no before the government says no. I always let it be a client decision, right? And I outline the pros and cons. But I have seen the government say yes in circumstances that probably everyone else would tell you no. That's like a 100% easy no,
Right.
open shut case.
Right.
And so,
I'm aligned with that perspective given innovation within the H-1B cap exempt space. So I completely agree that, there's a need to also, continue to push forward for companies and for our economy and for society. It's, from my perspective and from our clients' perspective, to be able to figure out ways to hire. And we actually went ahead and filed multiple cap exempt H-1Bs in the last few weeks, and we were able to get receipt notices, and we're waiting on approvals, but we've heard approvals are coming. So, the lack of clarity around just this proclamation, and we still, are waiting for so much information in terms of what this means. And you mentioned the national interest carve outs. Um, we're already drafting language to explain why we should be part of that national interest carve out at Build. And I think there's some, I'm sure many hospitals and medical practitioners and folks are thinking about already anticipating that they might be part of that carve out. Because it hasn't been, there's no yet. No one said that those doors are fully closed. How are you thinking about the national interest? Do you think it might be reflective of what we've seen in the past, the national interest exemption? Do you think it's reflective of past travel bans and what we've seen for exemptions related to that? Or do you think this might just be categorically a new type of exemption?
I think it'll be similar in the sense, my approach has always been, what does this administration care about, right? Like, what does the administration making these decisions? What is it going to make it easier to get them to say yes? Like, what can
Yep.
I give them that makes them want to say yes to this,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
And that, that's not specific. I mean, I think that's particularly effective for this administration,
Yes.
but that is an effective strategy for anyone in charge. You want to make it easy for the government to say yes. They're, yes, they're always looking to say no, but like if it doesn't make sense for them to say no, if you've made it so if you're spoon feeding it to them,
Right.
it you're making your life easier, you're making your company's life easier. And I think this administration is the same in that sense, particularly when you are tying it to a priority that makes them look good.
Right.
Um,
Like
you
doctors
know,
and
I
nurses.
you can have meaningful conversations about whether or not that should be something our government should care about.
Right.
But at the end of the day, even if they're not saying it out loud, that is something any administration, anyone in charge cares about. And when you can frame it in those terms, you're giving the adjudicator the cover they need to say yes, the cover that they need to go to their boss so their boss can say yes, and the cover that they need if somebody calls down from up top to be able to explain why they're saying yes, if it's something that maybe would be on the fence.
Yeah. And so advice for companies might be, if we're thinking ahead about, how they should be advocating for themselves, what would you recommend at this
I
point?
mean, look at what the priorities are of the folks in charge, right? Figure out how your business goals align with those goals. And I'm not just talking about kind of like their policy platforms. I'm talking
Yeah.
about like who are they making deals with, right? Who are what are the other companies that are visiting, that are holding meetings with cabinet secretaries, with the White House? What are the conversations happening? What are the priorities that have been discussed previously? What's the next big issue? And how are you tackling it, right? Like, how are you making America stronger and
Yeah.
safer? And how does your work directly contribute to
Mm,
the empowerment of the American people? And again, I would look at the language being
right.
used by the folks in leadership or the folks that have management authority over your,
Yeah.
industry. How are they framing it? And you
Right.
frame your, company goals, what your profits, your products, your achievements in those terms, because
Right.
that is what the government understands. That is what they want to hear. And when you translate it, when you make it easily understandable for them, it's just going to make it easier for you to get to yes.
Yep. It sounds like a really smart strategy for this administration particularly, but I'm sure that's it's something that, any folks who are in USCIS are going to have, want to receive that type of argument. And I think that's really smart for anyone on the call who represents a company as you think about whoever your counsel is talking, putting together those petitions in that narrative. We've seen two lawsuits now filed, and one yesterday from the Chamber of Commerce. There's, I'm getting this question every day, like, what's the timeline? Is this going to prompt more information? How does this actually work in the legal system? Do federal courts have to take this case immediately? Like, what is this? How could this play out? Are we going to get an answer, but, in the next month, 2 months? Could it be a year? Could you give any sense as to how long and what we're looking at here? And if you think this litigation is strong and could be successful?
Yeah. So, I mean, the goal with litigation that I'm involved in is we want to get the government to settle or to like do the thing we want without actually having the lawsuit play out. Um,
Mm,
Sometimes, particularly for impact litigation, you want the lawsuit to play out so that you can change the actual
right.
rules. If we were talking about like a regulatory action, like a formal regulatory action, I would say we'd probably be, pushing more for, um, that litigation to play out, depending on how the administration responds in the litigation process. If they say, oh, we're going to, and I don't expect them to do this, but if they say, oh, like we're going to settle here, we think you're right, we're actually going to shift our perspective on this proclamation,
Yeah.
we would see an outcome achieved much more quickly. We can also petition the court to move more quickly based on the kind of impact that the
Mm,
significant impact it's going to have on employers if we have to move forward. I expect that we're going to see a court do something here
mm,
before the lottery, right? And hopefully it's sooner rather than later. I think what's super interesting about kind of both cases that have been filed is, I in particular, like the most recent filing was done by the chamber, which is a traditionally very conservative,
yes.
industry leader, and I think they're more moderate, I think, these days. But it is interesting when for the administration to kind of be on the other side. It's not like they can just be like, oh, it's the far, it's far left crazy is,
Right.
right? Like the chamber is, somebody that they need to kind of do business with. And I think it's an indicator that other businesses are going to start communicating with the administration that
Yeah.
this is an issue. And I mean, the administration wants to kind of abruptly shift people's perspective on this issue, right? Like they want companies to have these, to think about like, oh, am I seriously recruiting for US workers versus just finding the talented professional I want. And I think that is a conversation again that the administration is having internally, like,
Yeah.
because we are a global society right now, and shifting that hiring process has repercussions, and maybe it'll be beneficial to some US workers, but is it going to make us less competitive globally?
Right.
But ultimately those conversations that happen within White House leader, like policy teams,
Right.
White House leadership, GOP
Totally.
leadership, that is not, that's not the point of kind of these um changes in
Yeah.
policy, right? The
Right.
point is to shake it up on the ground and hope that like while they do
Totally.
rulemaking, behind the scenes to change the
Yes.
process, that those will be a little less shocking and a little less abrasive. So then, kind of we'll be like, oh, okay, well, that's more reasonable. Or maybe a court will be like, oh, that's more reasonable, right? I think they're going to push to have the fee stay
Mhm.
as much as they can. But, I don't know that they have realistic expectations that it's going to stick.
Right. Yeah, it's a fascinating approach, right? Just like shake things up in an extreme way, knowing that the dust will settle somewhere else, but make companies feel and really think. And I mean, there's some, I'm sure that I rarely try to take the perspective. I mean, I'm so every day in the perspective of the corporation, and there's some sort of strategy that can make sense if you're trying to make change and it's in line with the agenda of this administration that is incredibly successful in getting into the minds of HR professionals who are making these decisions and trying to figure this out. And there's a fear that has penetrated HR professionals right now, and that is effective. It is working. I think that I've, like you, have many corporate clients at this point in our program or in our pipeline who do hire quite a few folks on H-1B who have said, we can't stop hiring on H-1B. The administration doesn't understand that they can scream in our ears and they can do things to make us try to stop, but there's a reason the H-1B exists, and we are the reason. We need these
Yeah.
folks. We can't find US talent, or we have to recruit from abroad, or when we find the right person, this is such a niche industry that we have to have this exact human, and we'll pay what's
Yeah.
needed, we'll fight. And then, I think that hopefully we see this shake out where we land somewhere where their fraud in the system, we can all acknowledge, exists at some level, right? Was there another way to go about de-ridding getting rid of fraud within the H-1B world? Absolutely. This didn't need to happen. Like, you can shut down third-party placement sponsorships and not go about it by having a rule apply to
Yeah.
absolutely everyone
Everybody.
across the board. Um, but I'm aligned that, like, this is a fascinating strategy, and that's certainly what's happening in H-1B world right now. Now we've seen Project Firewall get announced as an even larger scope of crackdown. What are your thoughts on what's coming, and how are you advising clients right now regarding Project Firewall and a crackdown on compliance, including I-9s, E-Verify, everything across the board for companies?
Yeah. I mean, look, we are recommending internal audits. And It's a similar approach that I take to I-9 compliance, and E-Verify compliance. Just self-audits are really critical.
Yeah.
Um, making sure that your legal counsel is tracking the kinds of issues that the administration is talking about, that you're aware, that kind of you're not just relying on like, a paralegal at a law firm that's doing all of your filings for you. You're really paying attention to your corporate immigration process. You're paying attention to your foreign national employees. You're making sure that it's not, that they understand what could prevent them from entering the US. It's a significant additional devotion of resources
Yeah.
to these types of compliance efforts. And obviously, a lot of employers are like, well, where am I going to find the time, right? But I tell my clients, like, if you're investing money and paying for people to come here, and you're investing money in training employees that are foreign nationals, paying lawyers to help them get their visas, it is worth your time and money to ensure that you have a Loctite compliance program, and that everything being filed with your name on it is accurate and is being done appropriately. Because heaven forbid there's an error or there is some type of bad faith, fraud or misrepresentation. It's
Mhm.
not going to just impact that one foreign national employee. It's going to impact your ability to continue sponsoring people altogether. And it could impact your ability to continue doing your business. And I think when you put it in terms of that potential impact, right? Devoting a little bit of additional resources to like better compliance and monitoring really isn't that crazy, right? And I think, it's hard to get folks to take compliance as seriously as sometimes you wish they would. And it's often, people often call me after something has already gone horribly wrong.
Yeah.
And again, like the likelihood of that happening used to be very small. It is getting, it's getting more likely now.
Yes.
But I think that the work that you can do to make sure it doesn't happen is still so minimal compared to what you would have to do to deal with it once it happens.
Can you walk through what your recommendations are for a company that wants to do an audit of their immigration compliance structure, or for a foreign national who feels maybe their company is not doing enough right now and wants to advocate for what should be done? What would be the first few steps that you think a company should be taking right now in preparation?
Absolutely. So, generally, if you have the resources, hiring an independent third party entity to come in and do a comprehensive review is going to be kind of the best option,
Mhm.
in order to kind of get a full picture of what's going on. Um, if that's not an option, then making sure you have a comprehensive compliance document that tracks, okay, who is managing, or that you rely on software that manages this, and the software is reliable and hasn't been sued recently, or the company hasn't been sued recently for some type of issue.
Right.
That tracks states, that tracks, that where you keep all of your required HR documentation, or all of your required H-1B records, all of your required filings, perm filings, right? So that you know where they are, that you have an HR system that is up to date, accurate, and timely. I wouldn't discount, making sure your I-9s are tied up as well. What we're seeing essentially, if one government agency comes in and identifies an issue, they're going to refer that issue to another agency, right? Where they find, where there's some smoke, there's fire, right? And they're gonna loop everybody in that they can to try to, take advantage
Right.
of an issue.
Right.
So evaluating kind of who's in charge, who's managing this process, and do you have like a comprehensive corporate policy that details how you're tracking any updates regarding these requirements, how you are, quarterly. I recommend quarterly, but at a minimum annually, updating these records and checking to make sure that everything is appropriate and accurate. If you're a foreign national employee and you are concerned that your company is not doing these things, maintaining all of your own records independently to the extent that the company will share whatever they'll share with you, you keep on your own and you maintain those records so that in the event that your employer is involved in anything problematic, you have the documentation you need to provide your own defense, right?
Right.
And then one of the easy things that like I do with my clients is we film webinars about the process, about the visa appointment,
Yeah.
explaining, hey, here are where your documents are. Here's what you need to understand about your documents. Here are the types of questions you're going to be asked at your interviews. Here, like, this is the information you need to understand
Right.
if you're going to go present yourself
Yeah.
appropriately. And you should know this. And like, this is your life story. This is your
Right.
profession. These situations can be confusing, but at the end of the day, you have all of the resources you already need to be successful.
Mhm.
And then another thing that we've been doing is just establishing relationships with clients, with local leadership of DHS. In certain scenarios, it is helpful to just to be like, hey, I'm a big company in your region. We have a lot of foreign workers coming in. We want to make sure we're doing everything to be compliant, and we help facilitate that conversation sometimes. And it does sometimes lead to opportunities to address an issue before it becomes an issue, right?
Totally.
Particularly at ports of entry.
Yeah, definitely. So with the Project Firewall is also coming this really, it's like it's been a flood of H-1B related changes coming up. But the one that a lot of folks are thinking about right now is the wage-based lottery system. And, you know, first of all, if you could briefly explain what you're anticipating from this wage-based lottery system and how it will impact different types of companies, nonprofits, et cetera, in this upcoming lottery. And again, do you think this is going to stick? Do you think that this is going to move forward by the lottery time? And what are we going to see as a result? And is it changing the way you advise your companies?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's going to hurt foreign nationals that don't have a ton of experience. Or that are not in very specific industries that are already, high wage earners, right? It is, I'm already talking to clients about strategies for international students in particular who
Yes.
they want to hire, but they're like, there's no universe in which we're going to be able to hire them on H-1Bs anymore. So if they have companies abroad, they're like, great, come work for us in London for a couple years, and then we'll
Yeah.
reevaluate bringing you back on an L1, right?
Right.
And I think we're going to see a lot of kind of a lot of that, like a lot of kind of like, okay, like let's just cram this square into the circle hole to like make this work. I
Yeah.
I mean I think that you're going to see a huge between the wage lottery and the fee, right? You're going to see a huge drop off
Yeah.
in H-1B lottery submissions, right? Even absent a judge coming in immediately before and saying this is unlawful, you can't use it, go back to the other option, right? Which could happen, absolutely could
Yeah.
happen. Um, you're just going to see huge drop off, right? And they're gonna advertise that as a win, right? They're gonna be like, see, the whole program was fraudulent.
Mhm.
We've taken care of it, and
Yeah.
now look, the appropriate number of
Right.
folks,
Right. It's so true.
right? And even if it doesn't necessarily stick past this lottery, even if we see like a kind of a lighter version in the
Yeah.
future, it's still going to have the intended goal
Right.
of uh, completely shrinking the numbers.
Yeah. I'm so curious to see what companies decide to do because there's a reality where yes, many companies have the funding to be able to go ahead and change salaries to a level 4 wage to increase likelihood in the lottery. But companies have set bans, and what they do for foreign nationals ultimately will impact what they have to offer to Americans. And that is a larger HR strategic challenge in terms of setting that precedent for salary that will have impact not just today, but financial impact into the future. And so I've actually had a really interesting conversation with a company who said, well, the delta between the level one and the level four is so great that we are going to invest in different immigration strategies. And that's why they decided to move forward with our cap exempt program, because they said we don't want to set precedent at that wage for this position. We'd rather invest less than that into a program that gets a cap exempt H-1B. And that's just one example, but I know that there's going to be that evaluation of what is that delta and what are they able to make that, even if there is financial backing, like, does that make
Yeah.
sense for the company? So it's a really interesting corporate challenge that we're going to see. And I heard yesterday in a working group that I'm in that foreign nationals are actually approaching companies and starting to negotiate based on this wage-based lottery system, and go to companies and say, I need to get paid XYZ because you're going to have a better retention likelihood. And so it's like things are changing very quickly based on this new wage-based system.
I wouldn't be surprised to also hear that you have US citizen candidates doing the same, right?
Yeah.
Saying, hey, I will take this lower salary.
Yes.
And I'm a better deal, which again, I think is what the administration wants
Yes.
to happen. But I think you touched on it earlier. There are industries where that's not even an option. You know what I mean? Because we haven't put like the work in to get enough US. I mean, like, fine, if that's the goal, if you want to have enough US citizens to do the job, so you don't even want to consider foreign nationals. I think that's a stupid goal, but fine,
Yeah.
we can make that a
Yeah.
goal. You need to actually put the resources and infrastructure in place to
Right.
have that actionable
Right.
before you make it a requirement,
That's
right?
right.
Because um you're putting companies then in a position where they aren't going to be successful.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
I
it's lighting fires to see what gets
Well,
put
and
out.
I think it's also really interesting. We've been talking a little bit about kind of the litigation challenges here. I
Yes.
think there's, employers, companies are in a really tough spot because like it's scary to litigate things, and it's particularly scary to litigate against this administration
Yes.
because they hold grudges, and we see that on a daily basis, and so much of my work is reliant upon sometimes positive relationships with the administration, with my clients. I mean, it is a real gamble. It's a real gamble. It's a real issue for consideration. And I really commend companies that are willing to stand up and say, hey, this isn't right. This is going to be the impact. And, I want justice, right? Because I do think that there's a risk to that. And they're doing everyone a huge service by taking that on.
Totally. Absolutely. So what are you advising companies right now in terms of other considerations for visas? And I mean, that L1 strategy is really interesting. What else are you thinking about these days that is working, right? There's a lot that's being challenged. There's a lot that's not working. What's untouched? What is working well right now?
Yeah. I mean, look, I've had a lot of success with O1s.
Yep.
And I think I've recommended to some of my university clients that they start educating their foreign national
Yes.
students regarding visa options early on, eligibility criteria early on, so
Mhm.
that they can spend that 4 years getting the kind of evidence and pedigree that they would need to potentially qualify for an
Yep.
O1. Obviously, they're not necessarily in an industry yet, but they have unique opportunities, at least for now, to build some experience or get the necessary credentials. Talking to students about, okay, well, if you can't work in the US, where can you go work, right? And what can you do if your goal is to ultimately come back?
Totally.
looking at that, I mean, my colleagues laugh at me because my first question to any client is always like, do you, or any foreign national client is, are you in a long-term relationship?
Right, right, right. Is there any way?
Just, I mean, obviously don't do anything unless you're planning to
Yeah,
do it already, but I mean, we are in a universe where kind of every category is being scrutinized aggressively. And
yeah,
so I think it's important to be very strategic kind of across your long-term life goals.
right.
And sometimes for a handful of clients, it's meant an engagement a little earlier than maybe they would have
Totally.
needed.
Right. Everything's on the table right now.
Everything, everything is on the table.
I
Everything is on the
agree.
table. But
Well,
honestly,
that's a good
primarily,
immigration attorney. I mean, I like the ability to try to see everything as an opportunity and an option is what is needed right now. No one fits within a specific bucket, and those buckets, might not work tomorrow. So it's really about like understanding and foreign nationals understanding what what options plural they have, not just what works today, because that might change pretty quickly. I have a question back to your specific uh, engagement in DC, and if you're seeing anything or you have any sense of any sort of bipartisan interest right now that might ultimately create some modernization in employment-based immigration, or whether you think that really this is just going to be gridlock for the next 3+ years.
so I feel like maybe I'm naively hopeful. But my friends on the Hill do have, they like there is progress to be made on that front, right? Because there are folks on both sides of the aisle that
Mhm.
want to move this issue forward and that are motivated to do so. But they're a little bit hamstrung by like kind of operating politics, if you will, right? And the fact that, Congress refuses to legislate, absent kind of
Right.
a directive from the White House, or frankly, without looping in lots of tangential issues that may not be relative like to the specific issue that they're trying to move forward, right? So I think there is, momentum, right? I just don't think it's necessarily going to go anywhere right now. I think we'll see what happens with midterms. I mean, I think that we generally only see comprehensive immigration reform during Republican administrations. I think that, the current kind of clampdown puts, it gives us an opportunity to say, okay, well, we fixed the border. There's we're dealing with undocumented immigration.
Right.
Let's fix the system, right? And I think, eliminating some of those other issues that have often been the anchors to sinking other types of comprehensive reform, could put us in a better position to actually have a real conversation and see something done. I would hope. Again, might be naively hopeful here, but
Okay.
I
We'll
think
take we'll
there
take
is
some
some
hope. I
progress.
think there's not a lot of that right now. So I like that that's a positive note that you're projecting for folks, because I think that there's not a lot of trust in the fact, we've seen some legislation proposed, but there's just not a feeling that people are going to actually come together to negotiate it. And that's really like that's my sense of like, I see something come up on, and I immediately am like, well, we haven't seen change in decades, so why this year? Why now? Especially when things are the most divisive. But I think, but you're working directly with these folks who are working really hard, and that's very encouraging.
Yeah, I think ultimately it's going to be a White House call, and it's going to have to be
Yep.
something that they see as advantageous to them, right?
Right.
Something that they can take credit for with the American people.
Yep.
And ultimately, as a kind of, I'm a DC person, so I feel like, that's the spin that everybody puts on their stuff, right?
Yep.
And so thinking through how to do that now is what would get it done,
Yep.
right? If there's a universe of getting it done.
Yep. We did have one question from Bill Keys. He asked us if you had any predictions on how the Department of State proposed rule will shake out, or DHS proposed rule will shake out. So this is the wage-based rule, and obviously there's like been a massive effort, and there's, you know, in this rulemaking process and public comment to try to go through and pick apart the rule itself. Do you have any projections on how this lands?
I mean, look, I think there's gonna obviously there's gonna be it's harder to challenge. Historically, it's always been harder to challenge kind of rulemaking versus kind of the proclamations we're seeing, right? But I do think that there's opportunity there, right? And I think there's opportunity to push back on it. But they've been very strategic in how they've gone about with their rulemaking related changes, right? And they spent, basically the administration, I think about it like this. The first Trump administration came in and they had goals. Some of it was completely waylaid by COVID, but some of their immigration goals just like weren't effective, right? They didn't understand how it worked. They got frustrated by kind of rank and file workers. So the last 4 years, kind of along with Project 2025, like they really thought incredibly strategically and thoughtfully about how to effectuate their immigration goals. And while I disagree with many of them, I am impressed by the level of specificity and the specific kind of legal
Mm,
strategy that they've taken to
mm,
effectuate these efforts.
yeah,
And while I think litigation, I think there is wiggle room that we're going to see pushed, through various litigation. They're not doing these things willy-nilly, right? And they've thought through what a legal, whether or not they could be successful for legal challenges. And when I see the rulemaking actions, right, I like those I think are probably more likely to stick around versus stuff that they
yeah.
push out.
Interesting.
Right.
So would that also apply to the duration of status for F1 and J1?
Yeah. I realistically, I think that is something that is much more palatable to like a larger audience
Yep.
in all reality, right? So I think you're going to have folks that push back on it. I think the schools obviously hate it. It's going to create more work for everybody, obviously, but
Yep.
I think it is again something that they workshopped and did so effectively because I
Mhm.
think it's going to be difficult to push back on that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and these are going to have tidal wave changes for our our university and college system. I mean, our higher education system is dependent on international students, and this is absolutely, I mean, we're already seeing the impact, and it's pretty wild if these don't get turned over to see what happens next year, because that's really when application cycles are going to, you know, come into effect, and people are going to start to see and feel that impact. It's actually, I hope that the administration comes up with some sort of workforce development plan to complement these types of immigration strategies that are coming out, because there seems to be some mismatch. Um, what are you feeling most positive about right now? I think we talk a lot about the challenges. We talk a lot about what's not working, these rules that feel so to create this tumultuous nature of the immigration space. But what do you feel encouraged by, and what should people feel hopeful about right now? It's a
Yeah,
better
I mean,
way
look,
to end.
I mean, I think that I think that we are dealing with so many issues on this front. But I think it is visible in a way to the American public that immigration issues maybe haven't been, right?
Mhm.
And I think that there is a much more significant connection to the value of immigrants to this country. Um, and the impact that they have on kind of day-to-day American lives, right? And I think that the administration's policies are pushing they're a disconnect, right? Between what your everyday American thinks should happen and thinks feels value for,
Yeah.
and what maybe they're hearing. And I think that I think it's always beneficial when when we highlight the good work of folks that are improving,
Right.
improving our country, right? And I don't, again, I'm very sad that it's happening through this
Yeah.
mechanism. But ultimately, I think it's going to, I'm hopeful, and I think it's going to compel us to have a real conversation about the, value we place on folks who come here and, grab their slice of the American dream.
Yeah.
And, do we do we want, I think as a country we want that to continue to happen,
Right.
and I think we need to be more vocal about it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm encouraged by the voices as well that are coming out and talking about it and innovating and continuing to push. And there's a ton of immigration attorneys coming together right now. And even the group that came together to file litigation and pro bono represent these companies and folks, right? There's a lot of folks like yourself who are really, even being here and trying to create clarity where there's chaos is doing something and representing folks who need it. And so I think the more voices that exist and the more this community comes together, the better off everyone's going to be. But sitting back and being silent is going to allow this all to happen, which is why commenting during this public comment period and writing these things is so important for companies to just take a little bit of that risk and be part of. So I hope that might be one takeaway from today is companies should stand up. But Rachel, I want to really thank you so much. We're at time here for coming on today and sharing your insight. You're so busy. There's so much going on, but creating clarity for companies, for foreign nationals, and for other attorneys who feel that they're navigating some of this alone is part of why we're having these conversations. So I hope listeners leave and walk away with some clarity and optimism, which is rare right now. So thank you so much. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much for having me, Danielle. It was such a
Awesome.
pleasure.
Great to see you. Take care, everyone.